Good morning, everybody. This is a live extreme weather briefing as we have newly named Tropical Storm Elsa to discuss. It is heading toward the central Lesser Antilles. Tropical storm warnings are in effect for the central Antilles, heading toward the Bridgetown area. Looks like you're going to be in the front right quadrant, the worst portion of this storm. Right now, the tropical storm is a little bit tilted. The center is exposed on its western and northwestern side, with the majority of the convection located over the eastern portion of this tropical storm. It does look like this latest blob, though, is trying to wrap around the north side, which could be a sign of continued organization. Right now, Elsa has maximum sustained winds of 45 miles an hour. The pressure is also down a little bit, down to 1,006 millibars. So it definitely is organizing during the morning or during the afternoon hours out here in the open Atlantic. And that's usually a sign that this thing is going to continue to organize and intensify. And in fact, I wouldn't even be surprised if this becomes a low-end hurricane, at least after it passes the Lesser Antilles. Right now, it is forecast to be a high-end tropical storm, 60-mile-an-hour max sustained winds on approach to the central Antilles. And right now, this thing is being steered by a massive Bermuda High just off to its north. And there is some model differences right now in the forecast track. It does look like there are a couple different camps. One camp is a little bit further south. Still, some of the members of the various ensembles are hanging on with that southern track, taking it into the Gulf of Mexico. And then other camps are recurving it off to the north, even missing the entire U.S. completely. The European model and its associated members are leaning more toward a weaker storm a little bit further north, getting torn up by Hispaniola and then recurving out to sea. And the GFS has been trending toward that European solution with time, so it is very possible that could be happening once again, it appears, as it's moving off to the northwest. And there is the official Hurricane Center track as well. Heading off to the northwest. There's some pressure data as well being sampled, likely Hurricane Hunter aircraft. They're heading down to investigate. But right now it is forecast to be a tropical storm throughout its duration. The current forecast track takes it just to the south of the Greater Antilles, which would allow it to maintain itself. Then it passes over Cuba. The higher terrain may weaken a bit and then re-intensify in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. But this forecast track seems to be an average between the two different camps. And based on what I'm seeing in the ensembles, there's either going to be a track into the Gulf of Mexico with a stronger western lobe of that Bermuda High and a weaker trough over the eastern U.S., or the Bermuda High is going to get shunted off to the east, and you're going to have more troughing on the east coast. That's going to lead to a weaker and further north storm, potentially directly over Hispaniola that would weaken it even further, contribute further to a further north track, and then it'll track into that weakness on the western side of that subtropical high, which is forecast by the European model to be shunted off to the east with a little bit stronger of an east coast trough. But right now, the Hurricane Center track is right down the middle of those two solutions. But it does look like, based on the different ensemble members, that it's going to be an either-or type of a scenario, either a Gulf of Mexico storm or something that turns off to the north and misses the U.S. completely. Of course, it is still possible that it could go right down the middle, exactly how the NHC forecast track looks. But I have a feeling this thing is going to recurve just based on the trends of the GFS, the European, and that trough being a little bit stronger than we thought. But right now, it does look like this system is organizing. The center of circulation is probably somewhere out in this region on the eastern edge of that convective blob. But it does look like this invigorated convective burst here just to the north of the center does have a potential to wrap around this storm and then become even more symmetric in terms of its convection wrapped around the center, and that would allow it to intensify just a little bit further. And this is the Radar Omega app that I'm using here, a great tool to be tracking these tropical systems. You can see that it is enveloped in within quite a bit of dry air as well, but these hurricanes, these tropical cyclones, once they intensify and develop a nice central dense overcast, have a way of carving out an environment within that dryness. But this further north track than what we saw yesterday, that's a little bit closer to the Greater Antilles, the water temperatures aren't quite as warm as they are at the lower latitudes into the middle of the Caribbean Sea. The middle of the Caribbean into the central and western Gulf of Mexico is quite a bit warmer, greater than 28 degrees Celsius. A little bit borderline, though, further north. And that's one of the factors on why this forecast intensity maintains it at a tropical storm. Some of the hurricane models, hurricane intensity models, do bring Elsa into a low-end hurricane, but we'll just have to wait and see. The environment isn't incredibly favorable upstream, and of course there are some model discrepancies still on the handling of that Bermuda High off to the north. Our lead wave that we were also watching is dissipating, as we discussed yesterday. Majority of those models are dissipating that system, but it is possible that this lead tropical wave here could kind of pave the way for Elsa to survive and be this long track tropical storm, potentially with impacts over the southeastern U.S. early next week. So this last position here is a forecast for Tuesday, 6 a.m. Tuesday, July 6th. Looks like we're going to have a tropical storm located off the coast of Florida. Of course, there is a lot of uncertainty, though, that increases with time as the system continues to move off to the west-northwest quite rapidly as well. And the main steering mechanism, as I mentioned, is that massive Bermuda High off to the north of it. Anticyclonic flow around that high clockwise, like a clock, and you get those easterlies on the south side. That's the steering flow along the south side of that intense Bermuda High there. See if I can find it. There we go. For annotation, there you can see this intense high. And the European model shunts this high off to the southeast as a trough arrives on the east coast. And the GFS has a weaker trough, has a stronger Bermuda High that's able to maintain this western lobe just a little bit more. And that would lead to a further west-northwest track to the south of it, maybe into the Gulf of Mexico, maybe a little bit further east. Whereas the European, though, consolidates this high off to the southeast with a stronger trough along the east coast. And that weakness on the western edge of that anticyclone will cause a weaker storm to be a little bit further north, pass over the mountains of Hispaniola, and then recurve out to sea. There is also a chance that a middle ground solution happens where this thing survives Hispaniola, storms up the Bahamas, and then heads up the east coast, maybe toward the Carolinas as well, Outer Banks. Need to keep a close eye on this. Really anywhere, though, from the central Gulf Coast, even the Yucatan, all the way up through the Florida Peninsula and the East Coast, need to keep an eye on this system because there still are ensemble members that take Elsa further west into the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm going to show you those various ensemble members coming up here using the incredible graphics from the tropicaltidbits.com website. You can support this website, become a patron, using Patreon as well. Levi Cohen, who I believe is working now out of the Joint Typhoon Warning Center out there in Hawaii, just continues to maintain this incredibly useful resource for all of us meteorologists. But here is the latest GFS ensemble. This is updated at 12Z. You can see the individual members. Still has a couple holdouts going due west toward the Yucatan into the western Gulf of Mexico. That's a very low confidence, least likely scenario out there, and it looks like it's a weaker storm out here as well. Those brighter colors show the lower pressures. Looks like some of the stronger solutions are out here over the open Gulf Stream with a recurving storm, with even a strong storm coming up close to Newfoundland, whipping up the Gulf Stream on the western edge of that high. But one thing I'm noticing is that the GFS seems to be developing more of these members off to the east, and it does seem to be gravitating a little bit toward the European model solution. Still, though, there are a couple of these middle ground members right down the middle. That's the average of the GFS there. And even this solution right here would be a really big problem there for the central Gulf Coast. But what this shows is it looks like there are a couple different camps. There's this camp, and then there's the recurving camp. Basically, the European operational model solution that has a stronger East Coast trough, consolidates that subtropical high off to the east, expanding the weakness off to the west of it, opening the door for a recurving fish storm. But the new GFS still does hold that high a little bit off to the west, and that would mean a southeastern U.S. impact, and the official National Hurricane Center track there right down the middle, an average between those two different camps. It looks like the southern camp, though, now is starting to become this central Gulf of Mexico type of a track as well, as we're starting to lose these members downstream a little bit. But ensembles can be used to assess forecast confidence. If all these members are consolidated along a same track, then you have greater confidence in that forecast track happening. But when you get this divergence out there, that means that there's quite a bit of model uncertainty. And that's how you can use these ensembles to assess model uncertainty downstream. But that's the GFS solution. And the Global Ensemble Prediction System, that's run in tandem with the GFS ensembles as the North American ensemble overall, is trending just a little bit east too. These are the new 12Z guidance from the incredible Tropical Tidbits website, tropicaltidbits.com, run by Levi Cohen. And it also shows these two different camps. It does have a recurving fish storm that likes to intensify over the Gulf Stream on approach to the Canadian Maritimes, including Newfoundland. This would be a big time, probably pseudo-tropical cyclone transitioning into the extratropical storm here, but still those deep pressures and an expanding wind field as it lifts up toward Canada. You still have a couple members further west, but it looks like now the two camps are starting to consolidate over this track, over the central Gulf of Mexico, and then this track here, a weaker storm that passes very close to Hispaniola over the eastern edge of Cuba, and with that subtropical high focusing off to the east and opening the door for a recurving storm there along the weakness of that ridge. That could also happen. But in the meantime, very tight agreement here over the next 72 hours in that track amongst the forecast model ensembles there on the southern edge of that Bermuda High. Over the next 72 hours at least, it is going to maintain its position there over the central tropical Atlantic, and you're going to have rapid motion at 20 to 25 miles an hour off to the west-northwest. Definitely heading toward Hispaniola and central and eastern Cuba. Maybe Florida could have impacts as well. It does look like these models are starting to shift toward a fish storm just a little bit, or at least two camps. But look at this. There is some forecast model guidance that is suggesting a stronger tropical storm or even a hurricane re-intensifying there in the central and eastern Gulf of Mexico, even where you don't have those big-time warmer anomalies that you do in the western Gulf of Mexico. Still warm sea surface temperatures there that should support organization once this thing survives Cuba. But it is still a little bit early in the season. The sea surface temperatures aren't cooking out here just yet, especially with this slightly further north track. Down here, though, into the Caribbean Sea, waters are quite warm, greater than 28 degrees Celsius, and the central and western Gulf of Mexico there, very warm waters. A little bit more borderline further north, but still the Gulf Stream does have quite a bit of warm water as well for this thing to intensify as it's transitioning away. But everybody, anywhere from the Yucatan all the way up the central Gulf of Mexico coast, the whole coastline of Florida, the Carolinas, hell, even New England needs to keep an eye on this. Newfoundland, Nova Scotia as well. Just keep watching this over the coming days. We have a holiday weekend coming up, but it does look like it's going to arrive. If it does arrive in this area over the eastern Gulf of Mexico and Florida, it'll be about a Monday to Tuesday type of a time frame, so early to middle portion of next week. So still plenty of time to prepare out there, and you just got to keep watching the National Hurricane Center and, of course, my weather reports. Looking at the hurricane model intensity forecast, some of those model members do take it up to a Category 1 hurricane in the next 72 hours. It'll be pretty close to the Central Antilles, a little bit west of there, before getting influence from the Greater Antilles. That's when this thing could peak initially and then have a secondary peak with some of those hurricane models showing a recurving storm, showing that hurricane to re-intensify if it does recurve on the east side of the East Coast, interacting with jet dynamics, difluence aloft. Eventually a transitioning tropical cyclone into an extratropical storm could happen as it recurves off to the northeast, potentially heading toward even Newfoundland eventually. And here is the European model solution, and of course this is last night, but I wanted to show you why the European has a recurving storm. This is the forecast for Friday evening, showing basically a tropical storm here that passed over the central Lesser Antilles. Bridgetown could certainly get some flash flooding from this event, some strong gusty winds there as well. Then it heads to the south of Puerto Rico, where it could intensify into a low-end hurricane or a high-end tropical storm. But here you can see this monster Bermuda High, and it is a little bit further east at this time as well, according to the European model. But watch what happens with time. this trough here becomes dominant and focuses the Bermuda High a little bit off to the east, leading to a weakness on its western periphery. Whereas the GFS model, especially in yesterday's run, had this western edge hanging on, and this trough more shearing out over top that dominant Bermuda High. And then you can see the storm right here, much weaker tropical storm after passing over Hispaniola and Cuba, but passing right into that weakness created by that trough that is starting to shear out over top of this Bermuda High, but by this time it's already starting to recurve. And it does look like that subtropical high does try to build in from east to west just a little bit, but it might be too late according to the European, and that storm continues to lift off to the northeast as a fish storm, re-intensifying here in the wake of that trough as it lifts off to the northeast. But some different forecast model solutions. This is more of the fish storm variety. This trough kind of punches that subtropical ridge, shunts it off to the east of Bermuda, and you get a weakness up here that causes a further north track over the mountainous terrain of Hispaniola, eastern Cuba there. It does look like the Turks and Caicos and the southeastern Bahamas could get quite a bit of rain from that weaker storm. And then it recurves out off the northwestern periphery of that subtropical high that's pushed a little well east of Bermuda. Last year during the entire season, we had that subtropical high anchored over the southeastern U.S., and that caused a lot of the systems to track into the Gulf of Mexico or even form in the Caribbean and then move up into the Gulf of Mexico instead of becoming fish storms. So I know this is likely going to be a very active season in terms of the number of storms across the Atlantic, especially with the year 2 La Nina conditions potentially materializing in the tropical Pacific, which overall, in a very general sense, would weaken the deep layer shear across the Atlantic basin here. But even though you do have a greater number of storms on average, there still is a question of the positioning of this Bermuda High, whether a majority of those storms recurve and miss the U.S., or whether that Bermuda High dominates into the southeastern U.S. and causes a further west southern track into the Gulf of Mexico and becoming big problems, just like last year did, especially for Louisiana there with Delta, Laura, Zeta, even Marco, the forgotten tropical cyclone that really weakened on approach but kind of paved the way for Laura to come into the Gulf of Mexico as well. We had a lot of those 1-2 punches with that lead system kind of paving the way for a stronger system coming in behind it. Sally also did something similar there in the Gulf of Mexico, intensifying on approach. And even Hurricane Zeta was upgraded to a Category 3 storm on approach to south central Louisiana. Our surgeonator data was used in an official National Hurricane Center report. We did measure a storm surge in excess of 6 feet there in the Buras area, right along the Mississippi River, far southeastern Louisiana. We are focused on collecting storm surge data during that storm. Excited to deploy the surgeonator sensors once again for this year. But right now, Mark is really focused on the Dominator weather stations, getting those ultrasonic anemometers ready to go in time for hurricane season as well. I know I've got a second subsonic sensor on the way to measure those microbarometer fluctuations inside these tropical cyclones as well. But here is the operational European solution, lifting this storm off to the north as a weaker tropical cyclone, whereas the GFS takes it a bit further south longer and becoming an impact potentially for Florida or the southeastern U.S. or even the Gulf Coast. So we just have to see which one of those camps will dominate, whether it's going to be the further south camp or whether it's going to be these recurving storms. And it does look like the latest GFS ensembles are adding a couple more members with this further north track. And it's a more intense storm further north here as well, as it passes the Lesser Antilles, passing just to the south of Puerto Rico, and could impact portions of the Bermuda, or portions of the Dominican Republic there as well, potentially as a low-end hurricane. But this further north track would also take it directly over Hispaniola and then off to the northeast. And now a GFS ensemble even does take a stronger storm into the Carolinas, which certainly cannot be ruled out. Could easily get a Hugo type of a track coming right up into the Carolinas. Need to keep an eye on any scenario here. So still need to keep an eye out on this system, whether you're from the Louisiana coast, throughout Florida, the Florida Peninsula, all the way through the Carolinas, even up into New England, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. Need to keep a very close eye on this storm. And I'm meeting up with Sasha and Critter today at 3 p.m. to make some modifications to the Dominator 4. We're going to be waterproofing it with Flex Seal products, Flex tape as well, Flex Seal liquid. We're also mainly going to be discussing the mounting of a semi-permanent rod that my R.M. Young anemometer can attach to, just to have that extra layer of wind data on top of the ultrasonic from the Dominator weather station as well when we're heading down there. But I'm looking forward to deploying the network of surgeonator sensors. Here you can see the water vapor loop again. Definitely showing the robustness of that convection forming on the north side of the center up here. Look at this convective explosion, a convective burst even a little bit closer to the center. Appears to be wrapping in. You can definitely see a little bit more clearly where that center is located on visible satellite, but it does look like that convection is beginning to propagate a little bit closer to that center, which is exposed here on its western side. It's located right on the western periphery of that intense convection. And if this convection can continue to propagate west, closer and closer to the center, despite this rapid motion kind of causing a little bit of westerly storm relative wind shear here, then I do think that this thing could intensify. But the fact that we're getting this convective burst here during the diurnal minimum during the day, when usually you get a suppression of that convection and then a ramping up in the overnight hours as the sea surface temperature and land difference is greatest. The fact that this is still ramping up during the diurnal minimum with this convective burst is a sign that this is a pretty healthy system. It's got some healthy feeder bands coming in from the south here, feeding the moisture. It's a little bit drier on the northern side, a little closer to that Bermuda High, but I think that it is in the process of getting a bit more symmetric with this convective burst trying to wrap and propagate a little bit closer to the center. But it still is gradually organizing. Satellite estimated wind velocities, max sustained winds of 45 miles an hour with gusts up to 60, minimum pressure down to 1,006 millibars. So we're just going to keep on watching this here at Team Dominator headquarters. The lead wave, though, that we were monitoring is going to be a nothing burger as it continues to head off to the west-northwest, but it could pave the way for Elsa in terms of a moisture situation to make it just a little bit easier for Elsa to continue to intensify. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining my weather report here. I'm going to be continuing these updates through the holiday weekend coming up here, so definitely stay tuned as I continue to track this system. It's awesome to see the Hurricane Hunter data coming in as well. That's the Hurricane Center aircraft, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see its flight into this system and corroborate some of that satellite-derived wind velocities as it heads in. But definitely some great tools for tracking these tropical cyclones using the Radar Omega app. It does look just a little discombobulated, but just an organizing tropical cyclone. You can see on the visible satellite kind of these northerlies wrapping around the closed center. So somewhere the center is definitely on the western periphery of this cloud shield. Looks like it's pretty close to right about there, right about where it's analyzed. And that convective burst right there, it's probably a little supercell storm. Look at that little overshooting top that happened as well. That's likely a supercell storm. Maybe even has a water spout or two. Looks like another supercell storm there. And if that supercell storm can propagate a little closer to the center and get anchored in there, that would allow for a further intensification of this system as it heads a little bit closer to the central Lesser Antilles. So I'm going to be continuing to track this through the weekend. I'm also going to go live from Sasha and Critter's shop. We're meeting there at 3 p.m. for a brainstorming session on how to mount the R.M. Young anemometer, and also going to do some preliminary waterproofing with the Flex Seal products coming in here. And we're also going to be tracking Tropical Storm Elsa. Not sure if I'm going to be chasing this one. Obviously, if it recurves, I won't be. But if it does pose a threat to Florida, I'll obviously find a way to get out there and intercept this. If it does become an even bigger storm with potentially bigger impacts, then I'll be taking Dominator 4 out there. And, of course, our research gear to measure storm surge data in the path of this storm. So thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your Thursday here. Thank you for tuning in to my weather reports on newly named Tropical Storm Elsa. And I've got a lot to do today to get Dominator 4 into hurricane intercept shape. Starting off with our brainstorming session at Sasha and Critter's shop at 3 p.m. today. Never stop chasing.